My beloved child, do not move past this moment too quickly, because what you are about to hear carries an emotional truth that has been forming quietly behind the scenes for far longer than you realize. Something has shifted in the heart of the person you have been thinking about. Something they once refused to question has suddenly become impossible for them to ignore. They have begun to see a relationship in their life with entirely different eyes, and the realization has left them shaken. Not because they suddenly lost something precious, but because they are beginning to understand that someone they trusted may have been more interested in what they could provide than in who they truly were. And what makes this moment so powerful is that the realization did not arrive through a dramatic confrontation. It came through one small detail, one uncomfortable silence, one question they could no longer answer the way they used to. Stay close to these words, because the deeper truth is not only about money. It is about why they tolerated this situation for so long, what it has awakened inside them, and why your presence has suddenly become connected to everything they are beginning to understand. For a long time, your soulmate tried to explain away the signs. They told themselves that generosity was love. They believed that helping someone proved loyalty. Whenever this person needed something, your soulmate found a way to provide it. Sometimes it was money. Sometimes it was a favor. Sometimes it was an opportunity, a gift, a payment, a sacrifice, or simply the willingness to carry a burden that should never have belonged to them. At first, it felt harmless. They even felt needed, and there was a strange comfort in being needed. But slowly, the pattern began to change. Requests became expectations. Gratitude became entitlement. Kindness was no longer received as kindness, it was treated as an obligation. Yet your soulmate kept giving because they were afraid of what might happen if they stopped. Somewhere inside them was a quiet fear that if they could no longer provide something useful, the connection itself might disappear. They never wanted to admit that fear, not even to themselves. But now something has happened that brought that fear directly into the light. There was a moment recently when your soulmate could not immediately say yes. Perhaps they needed time. Perhaps they questioned a request. Perhaps they simply hesitated instead of agreeing instantly. And that tiny hesitation revealed something enormous. The warmth they were accustomed to suddenly changed. The other person's energy became colder. Their patience shortened. Their words felt different. Your soulmate noticed how quickly affection seemed to vanish when the answer was no longer convenient. That moment stayed with them. They tried to dismiss it, but the mind remembers what the heart is afraid to acknowledge. Later, when they were alone, they replayed the conversation. They remembered the tone. They remembered the strange pressure. They remembered how the other person seemed less concerned about their feelings and more concerned about what they were going to receive. And for the first time, your soulmate asked themselves a question they had avoided for a very long time: if I stopped giving, would this person still stay? That question changed everything. It did not leave them when they went to sleep. It followed them into the quiet. It entered the spaces between their thoughts. They began remembering moments that once seemed unrelated. Promises that appeared whenever someone wanted something. Compliments that often came before another request. Sudden affection whenever financial help was needed. Silence whenever your soulmate needed emotional support in return. They remembered times when they were exhausted, overwhelmed, or struggling privately, yet this person barely noticed because the conversation always returned to what your soulmate could do for them. One memory connected to another, and soon the pattern became impossible to unsee. What had once looked like isolated incidents began to resemble a carefully repeated cycle. And this is where their realization became painful. Your soulmate does not regret being generous. That is not what broke their heart. What hurts is realizing that a beautiful part of their nature may have been taken for granted. They gave because they cared. They offered because they believed love should make life lighter for the people around them. They did not keep a record of every sacrifice. They were not giving in order to receive applause. But somewhere along the way, someone learned that your soulmate had difficulty saying no, and instead of protecting that softness, they began leaning on it. Your soulmate is now understanding the difference between being loved and being useful. Those two things can sometimes look similar from a distance, but they feel very different when the truth finally arrives. There is another layer they have not fully spoken aloud yet. They are embarrassed. Not because they did something wrong, but because they are asking themselves how they missed the signs. They keep looking backward, wondering why they defended this person when others questioned the situation. They remember making excuses. They remember explaining why another request was reasonable. They remember saying, they are just going through a difficult time, even when those difficult times seem to appear again and again. Your soulmate protected that person's image because admitting the truth would have forced them to admit something else. They had invested far more emotionally and financially than they wanted to lose. This is why the awakening took time. Sometimes people remain inside draining relationships not because they cannot see the discomfort, but because they remember how much they have already given. Walking away can feel like admitting that the investment will never return. Your soulmate has been wrestling with exactly that feeling. They are not only questioning another person's motives, they are grieving the version of the relationship they believed existed. They thought their sacrifices were building trust. They thought the difficult seasons would eventually lead to balance. They believed that one day the other person would show the same loyalty when your soulmate needed it. But now they are looking at everything with clearer eyes, and the picture is changing. And strangely, child, this is where you entered their thoughts. Not because you demanded anything. Not because you tried to compete with anyone. But because your soulmates suddenly began comparing how different connections make them feel. When they thought about this other person, they felt pressure. When they thought about you, something softened. They remembered conversations where your attention was not based on what they could offer. They remembered moments when simply being themselves seemed enough. Perhaps you did not even know that those moments mattered. Perhaps you assumed they had forgotten them. They did not. In fact, one particular memory involving you returned to them with surprising force. It was not necessarily a grand romantic moment. It may have been something simple. The way you listened when they spoke, the way you noticed something they thought nobody noticed, the way you cared about what was happening inside them rather than what they could provide. Maybe you once asked them if they were okay and actually waited for the answer. Maybe you encouraged them without asking for anything afterward. Maybe your presence gave them a rare feeling of being seen instead of evaluated. At the time, your soulmate did not fully understand why that moment stayed with them. Now they do. They are beginning to realize that real connection does not constantly leave a person calculating what they owe. And this realization is creating a storm inside them. Part of your soulmate wants to confront the person immediately. Another part wants silence. One part of them wants answers, while another part already knows that answers may not change what the pattern has revealed. They have imagined asking, "Would you have treated me the same if I had nothing to give?" But they are afraid of the response. Not because they cannot handle the words, but because the truth might be confirmed by the hesitation before the words even arrive. Your soulmate has begun watching more carefully now. They are noticing what happens when they do not volunteer help. They are observing whether conversations still happen when there is no benefit attached. They are paying attention to how quickly affection appears when money becomes involved. And what they are seeing is making their stomach turn. The pattern has become clearer. There was another interaction that disturbed them deeply. This time, your soulmate mentioned something about their own needs. For once, they spoke about themselves. They hinted that they had concerns, responsibilities, or plans that required them to be more careful with their resources. Instead of receiving understanding, they felt resistance. Perhaps the other person became defensive. Perhaps they attempted to make your soulmate feel guilty. Perhaps they reminded them of everything they had supposedly promised. Whatever the exact words were, the emotional meaning was unmistakable. Your soulmate's boundaries were being treated like betrayal. That is when something inside them broke open. They started asking why saying no felt like committing a crime. They asked why protecting their own future suddenly made them feel selfish. They wondered why a person who claimed to care about them could not respect one simple boundary. And then the deeper truth emerged: healthy love does not require constant financial proof. That sentence has been echoing inside them. Healthy love does not require constant financial proof. Your soulmate has spent so much time trying to prove loyalty that they forgot loyalty should move in both directions. They forgot that love should survive inconvenience. They forgot that someone who values them should still want their presence when their wallet is closed, their favors are unavailable, and their ability to solve problems is temporarily gone. This is what they are awakening to now. But there is something even more personal hidden beneath their frustration. Your soulmate is angry with themselves. They have been replaying moments when they ignored their intuition. There were times when something felt wrong. A quiet discomfort would appear before another request. Their heart would tighten when their phone lit up because they already suspected what the conversation would become. They noticed that certain messages only arrived when something was needed. Yet they kept pushing that intuition away because they wanted to believe the best. This anger is not permanent. It is part of the awakening. They are learning that kindness without boundaries eventually becomes self-abandonment. They are learning that generosity should not require sacrificing peace. They are learning that love cannot be measured by how much one person is willing to lose. And while all of this is happening, your name has begun appearing in their mind more frequently than they expected. At first, they resisted it. They told themselves there was no connection between what they were discovering and what they felt about you. But emotional truth has a way of connecting things the mind wants to keep separated. The more they recognized how exhausting it felt to be valued for what they could provide, the more they remembered how different they felt around you. There was something about your energy that did not demand performance. Even if you and your soulmate had misunderstandings, distance, silence, or unfinished emotions between you, they remember that you reached a part of them money could never purchase. That memory is becoming louder. Your soulmate recently imagined a strange scenario. They wondered what would happen if everything disappeared tomorrow. If the status vanished. If the money became uncertain. If the lifestyle changed. If all the things people admired from the outside were suddenly gone. They asked themselves who would still remain. And then they thought of you. That frightened them. Because it forced them to admit that the person they may have kept emotionally distant could have valued them more genuinely than someone they kept financially close. Do you understand how powerful that realization is? They are not yet certain what to do with it. But something has shifted. Your soulmate is beginning to see that sometimes the people we chase are attracted to what surrounds us, while the people we overlook may have been responding to what exists inside us. They have also remembered something you once did not do. You did not pressure them. You did not constantly ask them to prove their feelings through gifts, spending, or sacrifice. You may have wanted their attention. You may have wanted honesty. You may have wanted them to choose clearly. But those things came from a desire for emotional truth, not financial advantage. And now your soulmate is realizing how rare that distinction is. For the first time, they are beginning to understand why certain interactions with you felt intense. You were reaching toward their heart while someone else may have been reaching toward their resources. The difference is becoming impossible to ignore. But there is still more. Your soulmate recently discovered something about this person's behavior that deepened their suspicion. It was not necessarily a dramatic confession. It may have been a comment they overheard, a pattern they noticed, a conversation that did not add up, or information that reached them unexpectedly. Whatever form it took, it suggested that the financial dependence was not as accidental as your soulmate once believed. They are starting to wonder whether their generosity had been discussed with other people. Imagine the emotional impact of that thought. Your soulmate gave privately because they believed they were helping someone they trusted. Now they are wondering if their kindness became a topic of conversation. They wonder if people knew how easily they could be persuaded. They wonder if the person they trusted described them as someone who would always pay, always help, always rescue. That possibility has left them deeply unsettled. They have begun remembering occasions when new requests appeared suspiciously soon after they had already helped. They are questioning whether some emergencies were exaggerated. They are reconsidering stories that once seemed convincing. They do not know the full truth yet, and they are trying not to make conclusions without evidence, but their instincts are no longer asleep. And heaven's role in this fictional story is not to tell your soulmate whom to hate. It is to bring clarity where confusion has lived too long. Because anger alone will not heal them. They need to understand why they became vulnerable to this pattern in the first place. Deep inside your soulmate is a wound connected to worthiness. For years, they have carried a subtle belief that love becomes safer when they are useful. When they solve problems, people praise them. When they provide, people stay close. When they give, they feel important. This belief may have started long before the person involved in this current situation ever entered their life. Maybe your soulmate learned early that being needed created security. Maybe they became the dependable one. The strong one. The one everyone called when something went wrong. People admired their reliability, but few asked what it cost them. Over time, giving became part of their identity. So when someone arrived who constantly needed help, your soulmate mistook dependence for intimacy. That is the deeper revelation. They thought, this person needs me, therefore I matter to them. But being needed and being cherished are not the same thing. Now your soulmate is finally seeing the difference. And this awakening is changing the way they view you as well. They remember moments when you did not need them to rescue you. Perhaps that confused them. Perhaps they were so accustomed to being valued through usefulness that genuine emotional connection felt unfamiliar. When you wanted truth instead of money, presence instead of gifts, vulnerability instead of solutions, they did not always know how to respond. You were asking for a part of them they could not buy their way out of revealing. Their heart. That scared them more than financial sacrifice ever did. Money was easier. Money allowed them to feel generous without being fully emotionally exposed. They could solve a problem and walk away feeling useful. But with you, they could not simply pay their way through the connection. You asked something far more difficult without necessarily saying it aloud. Can you be emotionally honest? And your soulmate was not ready. Until now. Because the situation they are facing has stripped away one of their oldest illusions. They are learning that a person can receive many things from you while knowing almost nothing about your heart. They are learning that generosity can create closeness without creating intimacy. And they are beginning to crave something real. There was a moment, perhaps only hours ago, when your soulmate sat quietly and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Nobody around them knew why. They may have appeared normal. They may have continued their routine. But inside, they were grieving. They thought about how many times they said yes when they wanted to say no. They thought about what they postponed for themselves. They thought about how often they prioritized someone else's comfort while ignoring their own. Then another thought entered their mind. What if I had invested that energy into someone who truly cared about me? And once again, your face appeared in their imagination. They tried to push the thought away. It returned. They remembered your patience. They remembered your distance. They remembered something left unresolved between you. And suddenly the story became larger than the person who may have been using them. Your soulmate began wondering whether this entire experience was revealing the kind of love they actually want. Not transactional love. Not performative love. Not love that grows warmer when money flows and colder when boundaries appear. They want a connection where they can arrive empty-handed and still be welcomed. A connection where silence does not automatically mean punishment. A connection where they can admit fear without losing respect. A connection where they do not have to purchase their importance. And deep down, they are wondering whether they once felt the possibility of that with you. This is why their heart is becoming restless. They are standing emotionally between an old pattern and a new understanding. One part of them still feels responsible for the person who depended on them. Another part is beginning to say, enough. They are starting to practice that word privately. Enough. Enough explaining. Enough rescuing. Enough proving. Enough feeling guilty for having boundaries. But speaking that word aloud will change things. Your soulmate knows it. The person involved may not react calmly when the pattern changes. Your soulmate expects questions. They expect emotional pressure. They expect promises that things will be different. They may even hear accusations that they have changed. And perhaps they have. They are finally beginning to change in the direction of self-respect. Yet before they make any final decision, they want certainty. So they have begun doing something quietly. They are testing the connection. Not cruelly. Not manipulatively. They are simply stepping back. Offering less. Explaining less. Watching more. And the response has already started telling them what they needed to know. Messages that once sounded affectionate are becoming shorter when your soulmate does not immediately agree to help. Interest seems to rise and fall depending on what they can provide. Your soulmate is noticing how quickly conversations return to money, resources, or favors. Each observation adds another piece to the puzzle. But one thing happened that they were not prepared for. After your soulmate began pulling back, the person suddenly became unusually warm again. More attentive. More affectionate. Almost as if they sensed the distance. For a brief moment, your soulmate questioned everything. Perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps they had been too suspicious. Perhaps this person truly cared. Then came another request. That was the moment the illusion cracked even further. Your soulmate felt something inside them go quiet. Not angry. Not dramatic. Quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives when someone finally sees what they had been hoping not to see. They did not respond immediately. And during that silence, their thoughts went directly to you. They wondered what you would say if you knew everything. Would you judge them? Would you tell them you warned them? Would you understand why they stayed? Would you still see them as strong after learning how deeply they had been affected? These questions matter because your soulmate does not want to appear foolish in your eyes. They care about your opinion more than they have admitted. And that is another truth surfacing now. They may have acted distant. They may have tried to look unaffected. They may have behaved as though your presence had little influence over them. But the reality is very different. When they imagine starting over emotionally, your name is among the first thoughts that appear. And something else has begun to trouble them. They are wondering whether they pushed you away while protecting someone who did not truly value them. That realization is heavier than the financial loss. Money can return. Time cannot. Trust cannot always be restored. Moments cannot be replayed. Your soulmate is now thinking about opportunities with you that may have passed because they were emotionally distracted, financially burdened, or mentally tied to a connection that consumed too much of their energy. They are asking themselves questions they once avoided. What if I misunderstood the person who genuinely cared? What if I kept choosing responsibility over real connection? What if the person I thought needed me was simply benefiting from me? And what if the person I kept at a distance was actually the one who saw me? Those questions are opening a door inside them. But the biggest revelation has not happened yet. Because there is one detail your soulmate recently discovered that may explain why the requests became more frequent, why the pressure intensified whenever they tried to pull back, and why the person involved suddenly became nervous when your soulmate mentioned changing their financial priorities. Your soulmate noticed something they were never meant to notice. At first, it looked insignificant. A fragment of a conversation. A strange comment. A name they recognized. A detail that did not match the story they had been told. But once your soulmate connected that detail with something that happened weeks earlier, their entire understanding of the situation changed. They went back through old memories mentally. Dates. Requests. Promises. Excuses. And suddenly, two events that once seemed unrelated lined up perfectly. Your soulmate's heart started beating faster. Because if what they now suspect is true, then this was not simply a case of someone becoming too dependent on their generosity. There may have been deliberate intention behind some of it. And your soulmate is now trying to decide whether to confront the person, walk away quietly, or first uncover the one missing piece that could confirm everything. But before they make that decision, something else is about to happen. Because the person involved does not yet realize how much your soulmate has discovered. They believe your soulmate is still confused. They believe another explanation will work. They believe another emotional story will soften the boundary. But your soulmate is no longer listening the way they used to. They are watching. They are remembering. They are connecting. And tonight, in the fictional unfolding of this message, they may finally receive the piece that reveals whether their generosity was merely taken for granted, or whether someone had been counting on it from the very beginning. What your soulmate discovers next may not only end one illusion. It may force them to admit why, through every uncomfortable realization, one person keeps appearing in their heart. You. And there is something about you they are finally preparing to acknowledge. But before they can say it, they must face the truth hidden inside that last missing detail.